Some secrets don't die in the woods. They grow there, waiting to come home. This story is about what happens when a coward faces the sons he once left behind. Where are you listening from today? Stay with me. Enjoy the story. The rain hammered against the windows of Miller's hardware store as Gregory Miller counted the day's receipts. At 52, he had built a respectable life in the quiet town of Millbrook, a successful business, a beautiful wife, and twin daughters who were the light of his life. His hands shook slightly as he separated the bills, a nervous habit that had developed over the years whenever storms reminded him of that terrible night 18 years ago. The bell above the door chimed, and Gregory looked up to see two young men stepping inside, shaking off the rain. They were tall, athletic, and unmistakably twins, but what made Gregory's blood run cold was their familiar features. The same dark eyes he remembered from long ago, the same stubborn jawline, the same way they stood with their shoulders squared against the world. "Can I help you?" Gregory managed, his voice barely above a whisper. The taller of the two stepped forward, water dripping from his jacket onto the worn wooden floor. "We're looking for Gregory Miller. We were told he owns this place." Gregory's heart pounded so hard he was sure they could hear it. That's me. What do you need?" The young man's eyes narrowed, studying Gregory's face with an intensity that made him want to disappear. "My name is Douglas Lynch. This is my brother Dennis. We're 18 years old, and we think you might know something about our father." The words hit Gregory like a physical blow. He gripped the counter to steady himself, his mind racing back to that stormy night when everything changed. These couldn't be the same babies he had left in the woods all those years ago. They couldn't have survived. He had convinced himself they couldn't have survived. "I don't know what you're talking about," Gregory said, but his voice cracked, betraying him. Douglas exchanged a look with his brother, a silent communication that twins often share. "We were found by a park ranger when we were 3 months old, abandoned in Millbrook Forest. The only thing with us was a blanket with Miller embroidered on it." Gregory's legs nearly gave out. That blanket, Thelma's grandmother's blanket that she had lovingly made for their expected children. The blanket he had wrapped around the babies before. "We've been looking for our father for years." Dennis spoke for the first time, his voice softer than his brother's but no less determined. "We know he's white. We know he lived in this town. And we know he didn't want us." The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Gregory looked at these young men, his sons, and saw not the helpless infants he had abandoned, but strong, intelligent people who had somehow survived despite his cowardice. The shame that had eaten at him for 18 years threatened to consume him entirely. "Why now?" Gregory asked, his voice barely audible. "Why are you looking now?" Douglas's expression hardened. "Because our adoptive father is dying. He's the only dad we've ever known, and he's dying of cancer. Before he goes, he wants us to know the truth about where we came from. He wants us to face the man who threw us away like garbage." The words cut deep, but Gregory knew he deserved every bit of pain they carried. He had spent 18 years building a life on the foundation of the most terrible secret imaginable. His wife Thelma didn't know. His daughters didn't know. No one knew what he had done that night, when fear and prejudice had made him into a monster. "I need to close the store," Gregory said, his hands trembling as he reached for the cash register. "There are things I need to tell you, but not here." Douglas stepped closer, and Gregory caught a glimpse of the scared little boy beneath the angry young man. "So you admit it? You're our father?" Gregory met his eyes that were unmistakably his own, and felt the weight of 18 years of guilt crushing down on him. "Yes," he whispered. "God help me. Yes." The three men stood in the dim light of the hardware store, rain continuing to pound against the windows like accusation. Gregory realized that his carefully constructed life was about to crumble, and for the first time in 18 years, he wondered if he deserved to have it fall apart. But as he looked at his sons, alive, strong, and demanding answers, he couldn't help but feel something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for redemption after all. Douglas pulled out a worn photograph from his jacket and placed it on the counter. "This is our adoptive father, Roger Lynch. He saved us from the woods, raised us, loved us. He deserves to know the truth before he dies." Gregory stared at the photograph, recognizing the kind face of the park ranger who had found the babies, the man who had done what Gregory should have done, chosen love over fear. "Will you come with us to see him?" Dennis asked, his voice breaking slightly. "Will you finally face what you did?" The drive to the Lynch house felt like a journey to his own execution. Gregory gripped the steering wheel of his pickup truck, following the red Honda Civic that carried his sons through the winding streets of Millbrook. Every familiar landmark seemed to mock him. The church where he had married Thelma, the park where he now took his daughters, Suzanne and Esther, the cemetery where his parents were buried, never knowing they had 2 more grandsons. 18 years ago, Gregory had been a different man. Young, arrogant, and terrified of what people would think when they discovered his secret relationship with Wilma Fuller, a beautiful college student who cleaned offices downtown. Their affair had been intense but brief, ending when Wilma told him she was pregnant. Gregory had begged her to end the pregnancy, but Wilma had refused, saying she would raise the babies herself and never bother him again. Then Wilma had died in a car accident during her 8th month of pregnancy. The babies had been delivered by emergency cesarean section, and suddenly Gregory found himself faced with twin boys, his sons, whom no one else claimed. The hospital had called him as the father listed on Wilma's medical forms, and for 3 terrifying months, he had lived in limbo, not knowing what to do. His family had expected him to marry Thelma Jenkins, the banker's daughter. The wedding was already planned, the future mapped out. 2 mixed-race babies would have destroyed everything he thought he wanted. So on that stormy night in October, Gregory had made the most cowardly decision of his life. Now, as he parked outside a modest 2-story house with a wheelchair ramp leading to the front door, Gregory felt the full weight of that decision crushing down on him. The house was warm and welcoming, with flower boxes in the windows and a porch swing that spoke of lazy summer evenings and family gatherings. Everything his sons deserved to grow up with. Douglas and Dennis were waiting by the front door, their faces grim with determination. "He's been waiting for this moment for 3 years, Douglas said as Gregory approached. "Ever since the cancer got bad enough that he knew he might not have much time left." "What did you tell him about me?" Gregory asked, his voice hoarse. "The truth," Dennis replied. "That we found the man who abandoned us, and that he owns a hardware store in town. He said he always suspected you were still here, somewhere." The front door opened before they could knock, revealing a woman in her 50s with graying hair and kind eyes. "You must be Gregory," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Sherry Lynch. Roger is waiting for you in the living room." Gregory followed the twins inside, his heart racing. The house smelled of home-cooked meals and medicine, with family photographs covering every surface. He saw pictures of Douglas and Dennis at every age, first steps, little league games, graduation ceremonies, all the moments he had missed, all the memories that belonged to someone else. Roger Lynch was sitting in a hospital bed that had been moved into the living room. Cancer had ravaged his body, but his eyes were alert and steady as Gregory entered. He had been a big man once, Gregory could tell, but now he seemed fragile, connected to an oxygen tank that hissed softly in the corner. "So you're the one," Roger said, his voice weak but clear. "You're the father who left my boys to die in the woods." Gregory felt his knees buckle, but Douglas caught his arm, steadying him. The irony wasn't lost on him, his son preventing his fall. Gregory started, then stopped. What could he possibly say? What words could justify what he had done? "Sit down," Roger said, gesturing to a chair beside his bed. "I've been waiting 18 years to meet you. I have things to say." Gregory sat, his hands shaking. Sherry quietly left the room, giving them privacy, while Douglas and Dennis stood on either side of their adoptive father's bed like sentinels. "I was working as a park ranger back then," Roger began, his breathing labored. "October 15th, 1987. Worst storm we'd had in years. I was doing a final check of the trails before heading home when I heard crying. Thought it was an animal at first. Maybe a wounded deer." Gregory closed his eyes, remembering that night. The rain, the darkness, the terrible certainty that he was about to destroy his own future. "I found them under a big oak tree," Roger continued. 2 tiny babies, couldn't have been more than 3 months old, wrapped in a blanket. They were soaked through, hypothermic, barely breathing. 5 more minutes, and they would have been dead. "Roger," Sherry called from the kitchen. "Do you need your medicine?" "In a minute, honey," he called back, never taking his eyes off Gregory. I need to finish this first. Douglas sat on the edge of the bed, taking his father's hand. Dad, you don't have to— Yes, I do, Roger interrupted firmly. I've carried this story for 18 years, and I'm not leaving this world without telling it. He turned back to Gregory, his gaze intense despite his weakened state. Sherry and I had been trying to have children for 10 years. We'd suffered 3 miscarriages, and the doctors said it wasn't going to happen for us. Then suddenly, there were these 2 beautiful babies who needed parents, and we needed children to love. Gregory felt tears streaming down his face. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry. Don't apologize to me, Roger said sharply. I got the greatest gift of my life that night. These boys have been my pride and joy. They've never given me a moment's trouble, never made me question whether I did the right thing by taking them in. Dennis stepped forward, his voice tight with emotion. Dad, we need to know why. Why did he leave us? What was so terrible about us that our own father couldn't stand to look at us? Roger's eyes softened as he looked at his sons. That's not your question to ask, Dennis. That's his burden to carry. He turned back to Gregory. But I do want to know. Not for me, but for them. They deserve to understand. Gregory took a shaky breath, knowing the moment of truth had arrived. I was 22 years old and engaged to be married. Your birth mother was Wilma Fuller. She was a beautiful woman, but she was Latina, and my family, my community, it was 1987, and things were different then. I was a coward. You were a racist, Douglas said bluntly. Yes, Gregory admitted, the word like poison in his mouth. I was. I thought I was protecting my future, my reputation. I thought if I just got rid of the problem, I could pretend it never happened. The room fell silent except for the hiss of the oxygen tank. Roger studied Gregory's face for a long moment. And now? He asked. Are you still that same coward? Gregory looked at his sons, really looked at them for the first time. They were magnificent young men, strong and intelligent, with their mother's beauty, and what he hoped was some of his own stubborn determination. They had survived his abandonment and thrived despite it. I don't know, he said honestly. I've spent 18 years being someone else, building a life on a lie. I have a wife and 2 daughters who don't know any of this. I don't know who I am anymore. Then it's time to figure it out, Roger said. Because these boys have questions, and you're going to answer them. All of them. Douglas pulled out a worn notebook from his jacket. We've been preparing for this moment for 3 years. We have a list. Gregory's heart sank. A list? Everything we want to know about our mother, about you, about why you made the choices you did. We're not leaving here until we have answers. Roger smiled weakly. Boys, give the man a chance to breathe. This is going to take more than one conversation. We don't have time for multiple conversations, Dennis said urgently. Dad, the doctor said a lot of things, Roger interrupted. But I'm not going anywhere until this is finished. I've waited 18 years to see how this story ends. Gregory looked around the room at these 3 men who had built a family from the wreckage of his cowardice. What do you want from me? He asked. The truth, Douglas said simply. All of it, starting with our mother. Who was she? What was she like? Did she love us? Gregory felt a sob catch in his throat. Yes, he whispered. She loved you so much. She said you were going to be the most beautiful boys in the world, and she was right. For the first time since entering the house, Gregory saw something other than anger in his son's eyes. He saw hope. But then Roger spoke again, his voice carrying a weight that made Gregory's blood run cold. There's something else you need to know, Roger said, his breathing becoming more labored. About what happened after we found you. About what we discovered in that blanket. Gregory's heart stopped. What do you mean? Roger looked at his sons, then back at Gregory. We never told the boys about the letter. The silence in the room was suffocating. Gregory felt his world tilting on its axis as Roger Lynch's words echoed in his mind. A letter. There had been a letter with the babies, and he had never known about it. What letter? Gregory's voice was barely a whisper. Roger looked at Sherry, who had quietly returned to the room. She nodded and disappeared upstairs, her footsteps creaking on the old wooden floors. Douglas and Dennis exchanged glances, clearly as surprised as Gregory by this revelation. Dad, you never told us about a letter, Dennis said, his voice tight with confusion. There were things I thought you weren't ready to hear, Roger replied. his breathing becoming more labored. Things that might have hurt you more than helped you. Sherry returned with a small wooden box, the kind used to store precious keepsakes. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed it on the bed beside her husband. "Are you sure about this, Roger? After all these years?" "I'm dying, Sherry. If not now, when?" Gregory watched in fascination and terror as Roger slowly opened the box. Inside was a faded envelope, yellowed with age, along with the blanket he remembered. His grandmother's blanket with Miller embroidered in careful blue stitches. "We found this sewn into the lining of the blanket," Roger said, pulling out the envelope. It was in a plastic bag, protected from the rain. Someone wanted to make sure it survived. Gregory's heart pounded as he recognized the handwriting on the envelope. Wilma's careful script, the same handwriting he had seen on grocery lists and love notes during their brief time together. "She wrote this?" Gregory asked, his voice cracking. "Read it," Roger said, holding out the letter. "Read it to all of us. These boys deserve to hear their mother's words." Gregory's hands shook as he took the envelope. The paper was soft with age, and he could barely breathe as he carefully opened it. Inside were 2 sheets of paper covered in Wilma's familiar handwriting, dated just 2 weeks before her death. "My dearest babies," Gregory began, his voice breaking immediately. He stopped, took a deep breath, and continued. "If you are reading this, it means I am not here to tell you these things myself. I pray that whoever finds you will love you as much as I already do." Tears streamed down his face as he read his lost love's words. Douglas and Dennis moved closer, hanging on every word their mother had written to them. "I want you to know that you were created from love, even if that love was complicated. Your father is a good man who is very scared. He thinks loving me and loving you will ruin his life, but I know better. I know that love never ruins anything. It's the fear of love that destroys us." Gregory had to stop reading. The words were like knives in his chest, cutting through 18 years of justification and self-deception. "Keep going," Douglas said quietly. "Please. Your father's name is Gregory Miller. He owns a hardware store in town, and he has kind eyes when he's not afraid. I fell in love with those eyes, and I hope you have them too. He doesn't know I'm writing this letter, and he doesn't know that I've figured out what he's planning to do." The room went dead silent. Gregory felt everyone's eyes on him as the terrible truth began to emerge. "I've seen the fear in his face growing stronger every day since you were born. He thinks he can make this all go away by getting rid of you. But I know something he doesn't know. I know that abandoning you will destroy him, piece by piece, for the rest of his life. I know because I can see his soul, and his soul is not the soul of a man who can throw away his children and sleep peacefully." Gregory's hands were shaking so hard he could barely hold the letter. Wilma had known. She had known what he was planning, and she had still loved him enough to see the good in him. "If you are reading this, my beautiful boys, it means I was right. It means he couldn't live with what he did, and somehow, some way, he found his way back to you. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. Because love always finds a way." Sherry wiped tears from her eyes. "There's more," she whispered. Gregory continued reading, his voice growing stronger. "I need you to know some things about your father that he probably won't tell you himself. He grew up in a house where love was conditional, where acceptance had to be earned. His parents were good people, but they were scared people, and they taught him to be scared too. When he looks at you, he doesn't see his beautiful sons. He sees everything he was taught to fear. But here's what I know about fear," Gregory read on. "Fear makes us do terrible things, but it also teaches us what we truly value. When your father abandoned you, he learned that he valued his comfort more than his children. But every day since then, he has been learning that he was wrong. Every day, the weight of that choice has been teaching him what really matters." Douglas was crying now, quiet tears streaming down his face. She knew him better than he knew himself. "By the time you read this," Gregory continued, "your father will have spent years carrying the weight of his choice. He will have built a life trying to prove to himself that he's a good man, but he will never quite believe it. He will have learned that you can't build happiness on the foundation of someone else's pain." The letter went on for another page, filled with Wilma's hopes and dreams for her sons, her descriptions of their personalities even as infants, her belief that they would grow up to be extraordinary men despite the circumstances of their early lives. "I want you to forgive him," Gregory read, his voice barely audible now. Not for his sake, but for yours. Forgiveness isn't about letting him off the hook. It's about freeing yourselves from the weight of his mistakes. You are not defined by what he did to you. You are defined by what you choose to do with the love you've been given since. Gregory looked up at his sons, seeing Wilma's wisdom in their faces. They had been given love, tremendous, unconditional love from Roger and Sherry Lynch. They had been raised with the kind of security and acceptance that Gregory had never known. "There's one more thing," Gregory said, looking down at the final paragraph. "Something I need to tell your father when he finally comes home." He looked around the room, meeting everyone's eyes. "Gregory, if you are hearing this, know that I forgave you before you even did it. I forgave you because I understood that your fear was stronger than your love, and that's not entirely your fault. But now you have a choice. You can let that fear continue to define you, or you can choose love, not just for these boys, but for yourself." Gregory finished reading and carefully folded the letter. The room was quiet, except for the soft hiss of Roger's oxygen tank and the distant sound of rain still falling against the windows. "She was extraordinary," Sherry said quietly. "I wish we could have known her." "You did know her," Roger said, his voice weak but certain. "Every day in these boys. She's in their kindness, their strength, their capacity for forgiveness. She's been here all along." Gregory looked at Douglas and Dennis, seeing them not as the abandoned infants he had tried to forget, but as the men Wilma had believed they would become. They were everything she had hoped for, and more. "What happens now?" Dennis asked, his voice hoarse from crying. "Now," Roger said, struggling to sit up straighter, "we tell the rest of the truth, because there's still something you don't know, something about why your father's fear was so much stronger than his love." Gregory felt his blood run cold. "What do you mean?" Roger looked at him with eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul. "Tell them about Thelma, Gregory. Tell them about the choice you made 3 weeks after you left them in the woods." Gregory's face went white. "How do you—" "This is a small town," Roger said simply. "I've been watching you for 18 years, waiting for the right moment. I know about your wedding. I know about your daughters. And I know about the secret you've been keeping from everyone, including yourself." Douglas stepped forward, his face hard with renewed anger. "What secret?" Roger's breathing was becoming more labored, but his voice remained steady. "Your father didn't just abandon you and then move on with his life. He did something else. Something that proves he never stopped loving you, even when he thought he hated himself for it." Gregory closed his eyes, knowing that his carefully constructed world was about to crumble completely. 3 weeks after he left you in the woods," Roger continued, "Gregory Miller went to the place where he had abandoned you. He went back every night for 2 months, searching for any sign of what had happened to you. He never found anything, but he kept looking." The room spun around Gregory as this long-buried truth came to light. "How do you know that?" "Because I was watching," Roger said quietly. "I followed you one night. I saw you on your hands and knees, searching through the leaves and branches, crying like a man who had lost everything that mattered to him." Gregory felt the world spinning around him as Roger Lynch's words sank in. For 18 years, he had carried the secret of those desperate nights alone, convinced that no one had witnessed his frantic searches through the woods. The shame of his weakness, both in abandoning his children and in his inability to stay away, had eaten at him like a cancer. "You were watching me?" Gregory whispered, his voice barely audible. Roger nodded slowly, his breathing labored but his eyes sharp with memory. "Every night for 2 months. You'd park your truck at the trailhead around midnight and search until dawn. I started following you after the 3rd night, thinking you might be planning to hurt yourself." Douglas and Dennis stared at their father in shock. This wasn't the story they had prepared themselves to hear. They had expected tales of a man who walked away and never looked back, not one who returned night after night in desperate search of what he had thrown away. "But why didn't you tell him?" Dennis asked Roger, his voice tight with confusion. "Why didn't you tell him we were safe?" Roger's eyes grew distant, remembering. "Because I was angry. Angrier than I had ever been in my life. This man had left 2 innocent babies to die, and then he had the audacity to come back and play the grieving father. I thought he was searching out of guilt, not love." Gregory slumped in his chair, the weight of 18 years of misunderstanding crushing down on him. "You were right to be angry. You were right about everything." "No," Roger said firmly. struggling to sit up straighter. "I wasn't right about everything. I was wrong about why you were searching." Sherry moved to adjust her husband's pillows, concern etched on her face. "Roger, you need to rest. You're breathing." "Not yet," he said, waving her away gently. "I need to finish this." He turned back to Gregory, his gaze intense. "On the last night I followed you, something happened that changed everything." Gregory's heart pounded as memories of those terrible nights came flooding back. The cold October air, the smell of damp leaves, the desperate hope that maybe, somehow, he would find some trace of his sons, the growing certainty with each fruitless search that they were gone forever. "It was November 20th, Roger continued. 2 months after we found the boys. You were searching in the same spot where you had left them, but this time was different. This time you weren't just looking through the leaves and branches." Gregory closed his eyes, remembering that night with painful clarity. It had been the night he had finally accepted that his sons were gone, that his cowardice had killed them as surely as if he had used his own hands. "You brought something with you that night," Roger said quietly. "A small wooden box." Gregory's eyes flew open. "How do you—" "I was close enough to see, close enough to hear." Roger's voice grew softer, more compassionate. "You brought their hospital bracelets, didn't you? The ones from when they were born." The room fell silent except for the sound of Gregory's ragged breathing. Douglas and Dennis looked at him with expressions he couldn't read. Not quite anger anymore, but not forgiveness either. Something more complex, more human. "You buried them," Roger continued, "right there at the base of that old oak tree. You made a little grave for the sons you thought were dead, and you said things that told me everything I needed to know about why you had really been searching." Gregory felt tears streaming down his face as the memory of that night overwhelmed him. The small wooden box had contained the hospital bracelets that said Baby Boy Fuller A and Baby Boy Fuller B, along with a photo Wilma had taken of the 3 of them together just days after the births. It had been the only proof that his sons had ever existed, and he had buried it like a man burying his heart. "What did he say?" Douglas asked, his voice barely a whisper. Roger looked at Gregory, seeking permission. When Gregory nodded, unable to speak, Roger continued. "He said he was sorry. Over and over again, he said he was sorry. But then he said something else, something that made me realize I had misjudged him completely." The dying man paused, gathering his strength. He said, "I didn't abandon you because I didn't love you. I abandoned you because I loved you too much to destroy your lives with my weakness. I thought you deserved better than a father who was ashamed of who you were. I was wrong about everything, but I was never wrong about loving you." The words hung in the air like a benediction. Gregory remembered that night, remembered the way his grief had finally broken through 18 years of carefully constructed denial. He had knelt at that makeshift grave and told his sons things he had never been able to say when they were alive in his arms. "After that night," Roger continued, "I knew I had to make a choice. I could let this man continue to torture himself, or I could tell him the truth, that his sons were alive, healthy, and loved." "But you didn't tell him," Dennis said, his voice edged with accusation. "You let him suffer for 18 more years." "Yes, I did," Roger admitted without defensiveness. "And I'll tell you why. Because those boys I found in the woods, you boys, you deserve to grow up without the shadow of abandonment hanging over you. You deserve to believe you were wanted, chosen, loved unconditionally. If I had brought Gregory back into your lives as babies, you would have grown up knowing you were his second choice, his guilty conscience project." Sherry reached over and took her husband's hand. "Roger always said that love sometimes means protecting people from truths they're not ready to handle." Gregory looked at his sons, seeing the complex emotions playing across their faces. "He was right," he said quietly. "You did deserve better than what I could have given you then. You deserve to grow up believing you were wanted." "But we grew up wanting to know where we came from," Douglas said, his voice thick with emotion. "We grew up with questions that no one could answer. And now you have those answers," Roger replied. "Now you're old enough and strong enough to decide what to do with them." Gregory stood up suddenly, unable to bear the weight of the conversation any longer. "I should go. I've disrupted your lives enough. You have each other. You have a real family. You don't need the man who threw you away." "Sit down," Dennis said firmly. It was the first time either twin had given him a direct order, and the authority in his voice was unmistakable. Gregory sat. You don't get to run away again, Douglas added, his voice matching his brother's intensity. You don't get to decide what we need or don't need. You had your chance to make those decisions 18 years ago, and you made them badly. Now it's our turn. The twins looked at each other, having one of those silent conversations that only twins can have. Finally, Dennis spoke. We want to know about our sisters. Gregory's blood went cold. What? Your daughters, Douglas clarified. Suzanne and Esther Miller. We've done our research. They're 16 years old, born 2 years after you abandoned us. We want to know about them. They don't know about you, Gregory said quickly. They don't know about any of this. We figured that out, Dennis said dryly. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Gregory felt panic rising in his chest. His carefully compartmentalized life was crashing together in ways he had never imagined. I can't tell them. It would destroy my family. Your family is already destroyed, Douglas said bluntly. It's been built on a lie for 18 years. The only question is whether you're going to keep lying or finally tell the truth. Roger had been listening to this exchange with growing alarm, his breathing becoming more shallow. Boys, he said weakly, this isn't how I wanted this to go. How did you want it to go, Dad? Dennis asked, moving to his adoptive father's side. Did you think we were just going to have a nice chat and then go back to pretending none of this happened? Roger struggled for breath. I wanted you to have the chance to forgive him, to let go of the anger you've been carrying. Maybe we're not ready to forgive, Douglas said, his voice hard. Maybe we need to understand everything first, including why he thinks his other daughters are more deserving of his protection than we were. The accusation hit Gregory like a physical blow. It's not the same thing. Isn't it? Douglas challenged. You're still choosing their comfort over our right to know our family. You're still the same coward who left us in the woods. That's enough, Sherry said sharply, standing up. Roger is getting too upset. His heart can't handle this kind of stress. But Roger was trying to speak, his words coming in short gasps. Gregory, there's something else. Something I never told you about that night in the woods. Gregory leaned forward, alarmed by the change in Roger's condition. What? What is it? Roger's eyes were beginning to close, but he fought to stay conscious. The blanket. There was something else in the blanket. Not just the letter. His words trailed off as his breathing became more labored. Sherry immediately began checking his pulse and reaching for his medication. Dad, Dennis said urgently. Dad, stay with us. What else was in the blanket? But Roger Lynch had slipped into unconsciousness, leaving them all with one more devastating secret hanging in the air. The ambulance sirens wailed through the quiet streets of Millbrook as paramedics worked frantically to stabilize Roger Lynch. Sherry rode with him, her face pale with terror, while Gregory followed behind in his truck with Douglas and Dennis. The hospital's emergency room buzzed with controlled chaos as medical staff rushed Roger into intensive care. For 3 hours they sat in the sterile waiting room, surrounded by the smell of disinfectant and the soft beeping of monitors from nearby rooms. Gregory found himself studying his sons' faces, seeing Wilma's determination in the set of their jaws and something of his own stubborn persistence in the way they refused to leave until they had answers. He's stable, Dr. Taylor announced when she finally emerged from the ICU. But his condition is deteriorating rapidly. The stress of today's events has accelerated the progression of his cancer. I'm afraid we're looking at days, maybe a week at most. Sherry burst into tears, and Douglas immediately moved to comfort her. In that moment, Gregory saw the kind of man his son had become, compassionate, protective, putting others' needs before his own. Everything Gregory had failed to be 18 years ago. Can we see him? Dennis asked. He's asking for all of you, Dr. Taylor replied. But please keep it brief. He needs rest. Roger looked impossibly frail in the hospital bed, connected to multiple machines that monitored his failing body. But his eyes were alert when they entered, and he managed a weak smile when he saw them all together. I'm sorry, he whispered to Gregory. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. I wanted to give you all time to work things out. Don't apologize, Gregory said, pulling a chair close to the bed. You've given me more than I deserve. You saved my sons and raised them to be better men than I ever was. Roger's breathing was shallow, but his voice remained clear. Sherry, would you get the box from home? The one with the blanket? Roger, you need to rest. Please, he interrupted. I need to show them what else we found. They have a right to know everything. Sherry hesitated, looking at the monitors surrounding her husband. I don't want to leave you. I'll stay with him, Gregory offered. I'll call you if anything changes. After Sherry left, the room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Roger studied Gregory's face with the intensity of a man who knew he was running out of time to understand the world around him. You know, Roger said finally, I used to hate you. For years, every time I looked at those boys, I would think about the man who could throw away such perfect children. I would lie awake at night imagining what I would say to you if I ever met you. Gregory nodded, accepting the condemnation he knew he deserved. But watching you today, Roger continued, seeing how you read Wilma's letter, how you looked at your sons, I realize I was carrying hatred for a man who doesn't exist anymore. The Gregory Miller who abandoned those babies died in those woods 18 years ago. The man sitting here now is someone different. I don't know about that, Gregory said quietly. I'm still the same coward who chooses the easy path over the right one. Douglas, who had been silent since they arrived at the hospital, suddenly spoke up. Tell us about Suzanne and Esther. Gregory's heart clenched. What do you want to know? Everything, Dennis said, settling into a chair beside his brother. What are they like? Do they look like us? Are they happy? Gregory closed his eyes, picturing his daughters. Suzanne is artistic, like her mother. She paints these incredible landscapes that make you feel like you're standing right there in the scene. Esther is more like you two, I think. She's stubborn, determined, always fighting for the underdog at school. Do they know about Wilma? Douglas asked. No. Thelma thinks she was my first serious relationship. I told her Wilma died in an accident before we could get married. The lies tasted bitter in Gregory's mouth as he spoke them. So they think they're your first children, Dennis observed. Yes? Roger struggled to sit up straighter. Gregory, you have to tell them. Not just about the boys, but about the lie you've built your marriage on. Thelma deserves to know the truth about who she married. It will destroy everything, Gregory protested. My marriage, my relationship with my daughters, my standing in the community, everything I've worked for. Everything you built on a foundation of lies, Douglas said bluntly. Maybe it's time for it to be destroyed. Before Gregory could respond, Sherry returned with the wooden box. Her eyes were red from crying, but she moved with purpose as she approached Roger's bedside. Are you sure about this? She asked her husband. Roger nodded weakly. Show them. Sherry opened the box and carefully removed the faded blanket. She turned it over, revealing the lining, and pointed to a small section that had been carefully re-sewn. When we first found you, she said to the twins, this part of the blanket was torn. We thought it had happened during the storm, but when I was mending it, I found something else sewn inside. She carefully opened the re-sewn section and pulled out a small, sealed plastic bag. Inside was something that made Gregory's heart stop, a gold locket that he recognized immediately. This was Wilma's, he whispered. Sherry opened the locket, revealing two tiny photographs, one of Gregory and one of Wilma holding the newborn twins. But there was something else in the locket, a small piece of paper folded impossibly small. We never opened this, Sherry said. It felt too private, too sacred. But Roger felt that you all should see it now. With trembling fingers, she unfolded the paper. It was covered in Wilma's handwriting, so small it was barely legible. It's an address, Douglas said, leaning closer. In Millbrook. Gregory felt the blood drain from his face as he recognized the address. That's my childhood home, where I lived before I got married. Roger struggled to speak. Wilma, she knew where you lived. She could have contacted you at any time after the babies were born. The implications hit Gregory like a physical blow. Wilma had known exactly where to find him, but she had chosen not to. She had made the same choice he had made, to protect him from a situation she believed he couldn't handle. She protected you, Dennis said softly, understanding dawning in his voice. Just like you thought you were protecting us. But why put the address in the locket? Douglas asked. Why hide it with us if she never planned to use it? Roger's breathing was becoming more labored, but he managed to answer. Because she knew that someday you would need to find your way home. Both of you, the babies and their father. Gregory stared at the locket, overwhelmed by the depth of Wilma's love and wisdom. Even in death, she had been trying to bring them all together, to heal the wounds that fear and pride had created. There's something else, Sherry said quietly. She reached into the box one more time and pulled out a small envelope that Gregory hadn't seen before. This was attached to the locket with a note that said, "For Gregory, when he's ready." Gregory's hands shook as he took the envelope. His name was written on it in Wilma's familiar handwriting, but underneath she had added, "For the man I know you can become." Inside was a single photograph, Wilma holding both babies, all three of them looking directly at the camera. On the back, she had written, "Your sons, Douglas and Dennis Fuller Miller. They have your eyes and your stubborn chin. Love them enough to let them go, and trust that love will bring you back together when the time is right. All my love, Wilma." "She named us," Douglas whispered, touching the photograph. "She gave us his last name." "Fuller Miller," Dennis repeated. "We never knew our full names." Gregory felt something breaking inside his chest, not breaking apart, but breaking open. 18 years of guilt and shame and self-hatred cracking apart to make room for something he had almost forgotten how to feel. Hope. "She believed in me," he said wonderingly. "Even after everything, she believed I could become someone worthy of being your father." Roger's monitors began beeping more urgently, and a nurse rushed into the room. "I need you all to step outside for a moment," she said, checking his vital signs. But Roger grabbed Gregory's hand with surprising strength. "Promise me," he whispered urgently. "Promise me you'll tell your family the truth. All of it. These boys deserve to know their sisters, and your daughters deserve to know they have brothers. Roger, promise me," he repeated, his grip tightening. "Don't let my death be meaningless. Don't let these boys lose another father to fear." Gregory looked into the dying man's eyes and saw the same love and determination that had saved his sons 18 years ago. "I promise," he said. Roger smiled and released his hand. "Good. Now go home and figure out how to keep that promise." As the medical team worked to stabilize Roger, Gregory found himself standing in the hospital corridor with his sons, holding a photograph that proved Wilma had always believed this moment would come. "So what happens now?" Douglas asked. Gregory looked at these two remarkable young men, his sons, and made the first truly brave decision of his adult life. "Now," he said, "we go home. And I introduce you to your sisters." The drive to Gregory's house felt like the longest journey of his life. Douglas and Dennis followed in their Honda Civic, and Gregory could see them in his rearview mirror, two silhouettes that represented everything he had lost and everything he might still have a chance to gain. His hands trembled as he pulled into the driveway of the 2-story colonial house that had been his sanctuary for 16 years. The porch light was on, and he could see Thelma's shadow moving past the kitchen window as she prepared dinner. Suzanne's art supplies were scattered on the front steps where she had been painting the sunset, and Esther's soccer cleats were kicked carelessly by the door. This was the life he had built on the foundation of his greatest lie. In a few minutes, it would either crumble completely or transform into something he couldn't yet imagine. Douglas and Dennis parked on the street and approached slowly, their eyes taking in every detail of the house where their father lived with the family they had never known existed. "Nice place," Douglas said quietly, though Gregory could hear the underlying tension in his voice. "Your mother would have loved the garden," Gregory replied, noticing how both young men's eyes softened at the mention of Wilma. "She always said she wanted a house with roses." The front door opened before they reached it, and Thelma Miller stepped onto the porch, her blonde hair catching the light. She was still beautiful at 48, with the kind of warm smile that had drawn Gregory to her all those years ago. "Gregory?" "I was starting to worry. You're usually home by—" She stopped mid-sentence as she noticed Douglas and Dennis. Her smile faltered slightly, confusion replacing her initial concern. "Thelma," Gregory said, his voice barely steady. "We need to talk. All of us." Suzanne appeared behind her mother, paint still on her fingers, her green eyes, so like Gregory's own, curious about the strangers on their doorstep. At 16, she had Gregory's height and Thelma's delicate features, but there was something in her expression that reminded him powerfully of Wilma's intensity. "Dad, who are these guys?" Suzanne asked. Esther bounded down the stairs, her soccer uniform dirty from practice, her dark hair, a throwback to Gregory's grandmother, bouncing around her shoulders. She was the more outgoing of his daughters, fearless in a way that both thrilled and terrified him. "Are they here about the store?" Esther asked, then looked more closely at Douglas and Dennis. "Whoa," They look exactly alike. Are you guys twins? Yes, Dennis answered simply. We are. Gregory saw the moment when recognition began to dawn in Thelma's eyes. She was an intelligent woman, and the physical resemblance between the twins and Gregory was unmistakable once you knew to look for it. Her face went pale, and she took an involuntary step backward. Gregory, she said quietly. What's going on? Let's go inside, Gregory said. Everyone needs to sit down for this. The living room had never felt smaller. Thelma and the girls sat together on the couch, while Douglas and Dennis took chairs near the fireplace. Gregory remained standing, unable to sit still with the weight of what he was about to do. 18 years ago, he began, his voice shaking. Before Thelma and I were married, I had a relationship with a woman named Wilma Fuller. She died in a car accident when she was 8 months pregnant, but the doctors were able to save the babies. Suzanne's eyes widened. Babies? You mean? I mean Douglas and Dennis are my sons, Gregory said, forcing himself to look at each member of his family. You're half-brothers. The silence that followed was deafening. Thelma's face had gone completely white, and Esther was staring at the twins with an expression of shock and fascination. Where have they been? Suzanne asked, her artistic sensibilities making her more accepting of life's unexpected plot twists. I abandoned them, Gregory said, the words like broken glass in his throat. I left them in the woods when they were 3 months old because I was afraid and ashamed. The Lynch family found them and raised them. Thelma stood up abruptly, her hands shaking. You what? Thelma, please. You abandoned your own children? Her voice was rising, and Gregory could see 18 years of trust cracking before his eyes. You left babies in the woods to die? They didn't die, Douglas said quietly, speaking for the first time since entering the house. We survived. We were raised by good people who loved us. Thelma turned to look at the twins, really seeing them for the first time. Oh my God, she whispered. You have his eyes. Both of you. We're sorry to disrupt your family, Dennis said with careful politeness. We didn't know about Suzanne and Esther until today. We just wanted to find our father. Esther, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly spoke up. So you're our brothers. Like, actual brothers. Half-brothers, Douglas corrected gently. But still brothers, Esther insisted, her teenage certainty cutting through the adult complications. That's so cool. I always wanted brothers. Esther, Thelma said sharply, this isn't some kind of game. Your father has been lying to us for your entire lives. Gregory saw the moment when the full implications hit Suzanne. Her face crumpled, and tears began streaming down her cheeks. You mean Mom isn't your first wife? You've been married before? No, Gregory said quickly. I was never married to Wilma, but she was. She was the love of my life before I met your mother. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Thelma's face went from pale to flushed with anger. Get out, she said quietly. Thelma! Get out! She screamed, her composure finally breaking. All of you! I need time to think. I need time to figure out what 18 years of my life has meant. Douglas and Dennis stood immediately, but Gregory remained frozen. Please, he said, let me explain everything. Let me tell you about Wilma, about why I made the choices I did. You made choices that involved abandoning children, Thelma said, her voice deadly quiet. Children who could have died because of your cowardice. What explanation could possibly make that acceptable? Suzanne was crying harder now, and Esther had moved to comfort her sister. Dad, Suzanne said through her tears, how could you do that? How could you leave babies alone? I was young and stupid and terrified, Gregory said desperately. I thought I was protecting everyone by keeping it secret. You were protecting yourself, Douglas said, his voice hard but not unkind. Just like you're still protecting yourself now. That's not true, isn't it? Dennis challenged. You only told them because we forced your hand. If we hadn't shown up at your store, you would have taken this secret to your grave. Gregory opened his mouth to deny it, then closed it again. They were right. He had been protecting himself, just as he always had. Esther suddenly stood up, her young face fierce with determination. Stop fighting, she said loudly. Everyone just stop. The room fell silent, all eyes on the 16-year-old. Douglas Dennis, she said, turning to her newly discovered brothers. I want to know everything about you. What you like, what you're good at, what your favorite foods are. I want to know about the people who raised you, and whether you play sports, and if you're planning to go to college. She turned to her parents. Mom, I know you're mad, and I get it. Dad lied about something huge, but they're here now, and they're our family whether we want them to be or not. Finally, she looked at Gregory. And Dad, you need to stop making excuses and start making up for lost time. You can't fix what you did 18 years ago, but you can decide what you're going to do now. The wisdom, in his youngest daughter's words, hit Gregory like a revelation. She was right. He had spent so much time and energy protecting his carefully constructed life that he had forgotten how to actually live it. She's right, he said, looking around the room at his broken, complicated, impossible family. I can't change what I did, but I can choose what I do now. Suzanne wiped her tears and looked at Douglas and Dennis with curiosity beginning to overcome her shock. What were your adoptive parents like? Amazing, Douglas said with a soft smile. Our dad, Roger, he just passed away, but he was the best man I've ever known. He taught us that family isn't just about blood, it's about choice. I'd like to meet your mom, Suzanne said shyly. Sherry, right? She sounds wonderful. Thelma was still standing by the window, her back to the room. I need time, she said without turning around. I need to process all of this. I understand, Gregory said. But Thelma, I need you to know that everything between us, our marriage, our children, our life together, that's all real. That's not built on a lie. She turned to face him, her eyes red with tears. How can you say that? Our entire relationship started because you were running away from this secret. Yes, Gregory admitted. But what we built together is real. Suzanne and Esther are real. Our love for them is real. Douglas stepped forward, his voice gentle. Mrs. Miller, we're not here to destroy your family. We just wanted to know where we came from. And now we do, Dennis added. We don't need anything from you or your family. We just wanted to meet our father. Thelma studied their faces, seeing the same honesty and integrity that Roger Lynch had instilled in them. You're good boys, she said quietly. Despite everything, you're good boys. We had good parents, Douglas replied. And now we know we have good sisters too. Suzanne smiled through her tears. Can we start over? All of us? Can we figure out how to be a family that includes everyone? Gregory looked around the room at these 6 people who meant everything to him. His wife who deserved better than his lies, his daughters who deserved the truth, and his sons who deserved a father who chose love over fear. Yes, he said, his voice stronger than it had been in 18 years. We can start over, all of us. Outside, the storm that had been threatening all day finally broke, washing the world clean for what